Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Canadians with Disabilities and Their Allies. My name is Brent. I'm the host for the show, and today I am really pleased to welcome Mr. Peter Julian, Honorable Peter Julian MP for New Westminster, British Columbia. Welcome, Peter.
Well, thank you very much. I'm speaking to you from the traditional unceded territories of the Kakite First Nation and the Coast Salish peoples. And I wanted to say a special hi to deaf and hard of hearing people right across Canada.
Great. It's such a pleasure to have you on the show today and talk about the pressing issues that affect Canadians with disabilities across Canada.
I'm excited to have this discussion because, as we know, the hardship that we're experiencing right across this country primarily has an impact on Canadians with disabilities, and we're seeing growing food bank lineups. We're seeing more and more homeless. I'll talk in a few minutes about what the NDP is doing to fight back against that. But about half of the people who are homeless in this country and about half of those who have to go to food banks to make ends meet are people with disabilities. We need a sea change in how the federal government approaches disability issues and making sure that people with disabilities are supported right across the country.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I wanted to say is I know that when it comes to the people with disabilities and that marginalized groups, there's a lot of frustration from people sometimes, and it kind of gets misfocused, because Brent had a podcast last week about him being harassed, and death threats and all the rest of it. And I know politicians face the same thing of you're getting harassed and death threats and all the rest of it. And I just wanted to make a point that it's really important that we separate the policy and the person, right? Because the last time you were on the show, Peter, was about a year ago. We don't have to get into the specifics, but there was one person that kind of laid all the fault of federal government at your feet and said, you're to blame, Peter, for everything. And it's like, is that really fair? It's not, right? And I mean, like I said, I understand that people are frustrated, and I understand like people want to vent, but people really have to learn to separate the person and the policy, because politicians are people too, and Brent's a person, and he didn't deserve to get harassed either. And so I just wanted to kind of lay that out there and start there.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, in my office, we're seeing folks that increasingly are being abusive, and we have a zero tolerance policy with staff, and we do the same thing online. Right, there's somebody who's abusive, it's an automatic block. The reality is, we are seeing bad players that are deliberately trying to stoke people on social media. A lot of these disability accounts are actually accounts that are generated by dictatorships like Putin's Internet Research Agency in Moscow. What they're trying to do is divide, to separate, to attack. They don't attack the far right because they are actually very sympathetic to far right, the far right attack, and the ableism of the far right, basically cutting and slashing any benefits that go to people with disabilities. And so they're manipulating folks. We need to remember that we have to be in solidarity. And I take my direction from the bosses. My bosses are the people of New Westminster Burnaby. And about 20% of my bosses are people with disabilities. So I take that to heart, as does Jagmeet Singh and the whole NDP caucus. And we're going to continue to fight. And we'll, over the course of this show, talk about some of the things we've succeeded in getting and some of the things that we haven't gotten yet.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly. There's so many people that are in despair, hoping, for a relief. And I'm going to touch on that topic in a bit. Because there's so many people are just reaching out. They want results now. They want results now, and they're back and forth and about advocacy and like it's there's so much uncertainty, of course, because global inflation has really eroded away the buying power on disability support payments across Canada. They're well below the poverty level in Canada, as we know. Some provinces are well below that what they should be for the buying power. Other ones are getting up there, but they're still way below than what the threshold, what the national threshold is, according to the federal government. I would differ with their numbers on that, because that's just the basic amount. Like when CERB came out, Peter, of course, the federal government said, wow, $2,000 was the least amount, just for, that's not even including a one with a disability. Those payments their expenses are much higher than that. So it was $2,000, and they said that was the bare amount that person needs to get by, just to get by. Of course, the opportunity of getting the payments out to Canadians with disabilities, the promise was made way back at the beginning of COVID. Now it's over like 970 something days now, I think it is. It's the numbers keep ticking up every day, and still it's like the dangling carrot. It's we're getting there, but then of course there's definitely the divide of saying, well, oh, they don't care. That's why I keep hearing in the disability community, oh, they don't care. Well, no, they do care, right? And that's the thing. I'll get your overview on that, because we'll dive right into the Canada Disability Benefit. But first, before we dive into the Canada Disability Benefit, let's talk about the disability tax credit first, and then we'll talk about the disability benefit.
Okay, well, and I just want to preface, we're going to talk about the benefit not being a reality. The NDP has been pushing for a guaranteed livable basic income for people with disabilities and for seniors. And we're going to continue to fight for that. But I just want to note that when COVID hit, we had to fight like hell for a disability benefit to come forward. But the banks got this massive bailout package, $750 billion in liquidity supports. That's billions with a B. And it took 4 days for the Trudeau government to put it into place. The Harper government, the Conservatives, were the same way. When there was an economic crisis, they coughed up over $100 billion for the banks. This is to maintain bank profits. So the reality is, we have a majority that is Liberal and Conservative in the House of Commons. They're willing to give untold hundreds of billions of dollars to banks. They're not willing to provide a livable basic income for people with disabilities. And this is why part of my call today is going to be people with disabilities, 20% of the population. If the entire Canadians with disabilities population goes out and votes in the next election, they can determine who is the government. And the NDP can do a lot of things, but we have 25 MPs out of 338. So we don't have magic wands. And we're going to talk about some of the things we've achieved, but we could achieve a hell of a lot more if we had 125 NDP MPs than we can with 25.
Absolutely. And that's, you nailed it on that one, Peter. Encouraging people to get out there and vote. That is your right to see change happen. And if you want the same status quo, you just keep on going, because that's not working. it's not working for the people. What's happening right now in the country with the Liberals and the Conservatives. I know that the NDP, they really pushed to even get that other tax credit amounts increased, because the Liberal government, they didn't want to do it. They voted, I think they voted down or something. They were just kicking and screaming like, we don't want to do this to help people. And great on you guys for getting that pushed out there.
Yeah. So let's talk about the disability tax credit. You attended my forum that Alistair McGregor organized in Langford on Sunday. I was up with Lisa Marie Barron up in Nanaimo. I've done about 600 of these disability tax credit town halls across the country. It is true that it is a non-refundable tax credit, so it doesn't help everybody, but it's transferable. And often, most of the people with disabilities that can benefit from it don't know about it, because the former Harper government stopped outreach, stopped CRA, the revenue folks, from going out and telling people with disabilities about the program. And the Trudeau government has continued that practice. So the only ones going out there and talking about it are NDP MPs. And the reality is, every time I do this, there's a family that can be helped. Sometimes they get thousands of dollars. Sometimes with the Registered Disability Savings Plan, they get tens of thousands of dollars. That's the reason we do that. But we do believe that the credit should be refundable, not non-refundable. So even if you don't pay taxes, you can benefit from it. And ultimately, it's not the disability tax credit that is going to provide the sea change in the quality of life with people with disabilities. It's having that guaranteed livable basic income. And that's what we continue to push for. Canada is a rich country. If we can afford the hundreds of billions of dollars that have gone to shore up bank profits and the tens of billions of dollars that go to oil and gas CEOs, we can afford to provide a guaranteed livable basic income for all people with disabilities and all seniors.
I have an interesting story about the DTC, if you allow me, Brent.
Sure.
Because it might apply to some people that are watching. For many years, when I was like a teenager and in my early 20s, and then I started working, and I had a doctor that, I was born with cerebral palsy, so it's a significant lifelong disability, right? But I had a doctor that would always say, Neil, you're not disabled. You have no disability. You're so active, and you can work. You're going to school. You're going to university. Like you're not disabled. And so I remember when I went and tried to apply for the disability tax credit, the doctor would always say, no, I'm not signing that, because you're not really disabled. You're not disabled enough to get it, right? And so like for years, since from when I was like 18 to about 33, I never applied for it. So that's a lot of years, right? So age 18 to 33, I never applied for it. And then I got married to my first wife. She's passed away now, but my first wife, she was in a wheelchair too. And she had a lifelong disability as well. And so when we started doing taxes together, she would see me doing taxes, and she said, aren't you going to apply for the disability tax credit? And I said, well, no, because my doctor says I'm not disabled enough. And she just laughed, like she was literally rolling on the floor laughing almost, and she said, are you kidding? She says, you are disabled. You have a lifelong disability of cerebral palsy. You are disabled. And I said, well, all the time doctors tell me I'm not disabled enough. And she says, that's crazy. She says, go to my doctor and you'll get approved. And so that's what I did. I went to her doctor, got immediately approved. And then, so from then on, I got it. And I think they had, it was retroactive for 4 years, is it? You can correct me on that.
No, it's retroactive for 10 years. You should have gotten 10 years. That would have been $14,000.
Yeah, I couldn't remember I think I got 7 or 10. Yeah, I can't remember, but it was retroactive for quite a few years. Yeah.
10 years. Yeah.
Back pay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was just mentioning. Actually, I'm glad you mentioned that. It's how many years. And I remember at the town hall, Peter, you mentioned it was up to retroactive up to 10 years, and then then I guess the other topic within the DTC too is about the RDSP. I was just wondering if you could maybe dive into a little bit about that after we talk about the DTC.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I mean, it's income based, sort of based on family income, but a person with a disability can get up to $90,000 from the federal government over a 20-year period with the disability, the RDSP grants and bonds. And even if there's no contribution at all, if you make no contribution, you can't afford to make a contribution. You can get $1,000 a year. That's up to $20,000. If you can make a contribution, even if it's $1,000 to $1,200 a year, you could get up to $3,500 a year over 20 years. That's $70,000. So 70 and plus 20, that's $90,000. And so we try to make sure people are aware of this because it really provides a financial foundation for a person with a disability. Now, there's an age discrimination, as we talked about, Brent, at the forum in Langford, and it's 49, which is the cutoff age, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you think that there are people that become disabled in their 40s that need to have that foundation for their 50s and 60s and 70s. And there's also a clawback provision. The NDP, quite frankly, would improve the program. Again, this doesn't detract from the necessity of having a guaranteed livable basic income. Having that Canada disability benefit is essential, but the DTC, the disability tax credit on top of that, and the registered disability savings plan really would help to set a foundation for a person with a disability and their family. And that's why we're going across the country doing all sorts of town halls, because most people who qualify for it don't know about it and don't apply for it.
And they don't realize the benefits that you will get out of it. There's so many benefits that you can get out of it. Like I know that one-time payment, that $600 one-time payment, when the feds they got it out there, and it only went to the ones on DTC, but provincial levels they didn't get that, and that's why. And I mean, that's why I encourage, anyone who can apply for the DTC, definitely, because there are other programs that are going to be out there that you could actually get. Definitely.
Yeah, and Brent, can I jump on that? Neil, well, Neil wanted to say something, but I want to come back to the emergency benefit during COVID.
Yeah. Yes.
Did you want to say something, Neil?
I just wanted to quickly jump in about the RDSP. Like, I actually applied for it as well. Like, I did the one-time contribution. I think it was $1,500, and then of course, because I'm on disability, right? So I can't afford to do a lot of contributions. So I basically did only one contribution, the first one, and even though I could only do one contribution only, it's already up to almost $20,000, and that was only with one contribution. So wow. That's pretty significant, It is. You can imagine somebody, if they were able to contribute more, how much more it would be. But even if you can only afford to do the one contribution, it's already like $20,000 in your pocket. So
exactly. Yeah. You're absolutely right. This is why, the misconception of your doctor is why we do this as well across the country, because the government isn't talking about these programs. Some medical professionals have misguided understanding of the program, and a lot of people don't apply because of the myths around the program. And I'm not suggesting the program doesn't need to be improved. It needs to be improved for hard of hearing people. It needs to be a refundable tax credit. The age discrimination needs to be removed.
Yeah.
Those, and the clawback needs to be stopped. Those are all things that an NDP government can bring into place. But even with those things still in place, it's a major advantage for so many people.
Mm-hmm.
And do you know if there's any discussion regarding the DTC about the how long does a person have it for? Like, I know there's some discussion saying, some people say, oh, they only have it for 5 years and then you got to reapply. Others say, no, once you have it, that's it. Like a disability doesn't go away.
Yeah, and the Canada Revenue Agency tried to be pretty mean-spirited and tried to force people to go through the hoops on a more regular basis. And of course, for a lot of doctors, they actually charge for the form to be filled out. So that's a financial discrimination as well against people with disabilities. The NDP pushed back hard, and I understand CRA has backed off because I'm certainly not in my riding office. I'm not getting the same number of people that are having CRA forcing them to review or to resubmit. But if I suggest to folks, if CRA is trying to come after you, go to your MP, because your MP, you're the boss of your MP, and your MP should be stepping up for you and fighting for you if CRA tries in a mean-spirited way to try to take away the disability tax credit from you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you on that topic. That's definitely very informative, and gets people a better outlook on the how the DTC works. I mean, there's definitely lots of tweaks that need to be modernized, should we say? Because clawbacks have to end. I mean, the age discrimination. There's so many things that definitely. That the NDP is working at, getting that hammered out. I mean, we have to. It's like leading the horse to the trough, right? I mean, you have to force the federal government to make these changes because it affects people's lives.
Brent knows that. Brent knows that I call it the clawbacks, the pink the pink unicorns. I call them.
Yeah,
and
magical.
Peter, you were calling about nobody has a magic wand, and I call the clawbacks a pink unicorn all the time when I write emails to the provincial government here. And because I have my survivor's pension clawed back like every month for the last 10 years almost. And I'm saying, well, you've turned a earned income privilege of a survivor's pension. You've turned an earned income privilege into a pink unicorn where it's just poof, it's gone. It doesn't amount to anything. It doesn't count. We're just gonna like invalidate it. And I said, well, that's what you're doing. You're turning it into a pink unicorn, and that's not right.
Yeah, that's the CPPD.
Yeah, completely agree. Completely agree. This is. I mean, we need to be treating people with disabilities with respect, and these are all problems that are in the existing system. Laying on top of it, the Canada Disability Benefit. But can we come back to that in a moment? I just want to talk about the emergency benefit during COVID. Because the NDP fought like hell for that. We took it into the House of Commons. We got unanimous support. Then the government said, well, we're just going to send it out to people with the DTC. And I spent entire weekends talking with the bureaucrats to tell them to do it with everybody in the database, right? And then there was this magical moment. I remember it was a Saturday night in Ottawa, and a bureaucrat finally admitted to me that when people with disabilities across the country who receive provincial disability benefits send their tax return in that clearly identifies with the receipts that they are receiving disability benefits, whether that's in BC or Ontario or anywhere else. But what the federal government does is they throw that receipt in the trash can and they enter the income under other income. There is no inputting at the federal level that actually shows people who are receiving the disability benefit across the country.
Under provincial.
Unbelievable to me. It is so irresponsible. And unless we start doing that, and I want to shout out to Benita Zarillo, who's the NDP MP for Port Moody Coquitlam. She is our disability critic. And she has been relentless in pushing the government to start inputting all of the disability recipients across the country, so we actually know at the federal level who's receiving disability benefits. It is crazy to me that both Conservatives and Liberals have been so irresponsible for decades and refused to actually input all those people with disabilities. So when we fought for the disability benefit, first we fought to include everybody in the database, and we finally got everybody in the federal database, including veterans with disabilities and those who are receiving CPP disability. And then we got an extension, you'll recall, so that somebody who hadn't signed up for the disability tax credit could still do that. And so we added thousands of Canadians as a result of that extension. But until we have a government that actually understands that everybody with a disability needs to be inputted in the federal system as a person with a disability, we are going to see a Canada disability benefit fail because the federal government doesn't know who's receiving provincial disability benefits.
That's crazy.
And we need to make
Wow.
sure that this starts happening. And I thank Benita Zarillo, and Jagmeet Singh as well has been very clear on this issue. We need to start having a federal government step up and input everybody with a disability across the country.
Well, yeah, exactly, because it's like a jurisdictional thing. It's like, oh well, you're provincial. Oh, okay, but you're not federal. Well, we don't know who's on provincial. It's like it's just that divide, right? They got to cut that divide and put it into a national database so that people know, like, yeah, like it's not your disability. Like I've said before on my shows, you're born with a disability. You can get other disabilities as you get older. I mean, it doesn't go away. It's like the CRA just wants it to go away, like a pink unicorn, just poof. No, like
yeah. But I mean, I want to be clear about this. The federal government is getting the disability receipts as the person with the disability is filing their taxes and is deliberately throwing them in the trash can. That is the height of irresponsibility. There's no justification for this at all.
Yeah.
So yes, I understand that if somebody doesn't file a tax return, they'd only be known in the provincial level, and that does take some coordination. But this is the height of irresponsibility. They're literally throwing people with disabilities in the trash can, and it's got to stop. And both Liberals and Conservatives are responsible. The NDP would be changing that overnight.
And so much lost opportunity for people with disabilities across Canada of different tax measures or benefits that they could have normally been eligible for, but because the federal government, they deliberately, knowingly just filed under G, or it's just we don't want to deal with this.
The round cylinder under G.
Yeah, it is hurting people, right? Because now people are having to go to more food banks. They're having to look for like mutual aids. They're having to do so many other things that if they were just provided a dignified amount across for their income, just to get by. I mean, it's great if if people can work. I mean, that's awesome. If they can't, I mean, they should have a base amount, for their disability, plus any extra tools that they need to actually work with their disability. So if you need more of a mobility scooters upgrade, you need adaptive equipment. All those things need to be piled on to work with your disability, because nobody should be in poverty in Canada. Like you mentioned, Peter, like we have a wealthy country. We should be taking care of our citizens, not saying, oh, well, there's, we'll get around to it, or, we have your back. I think that was the magic line. We have your back. Don't worry. We'll go get to it. I remember the Trudeau lines every morning during COVID. I was watching. I used to call it, Peter, I used to call it the Trudeau show. Sonia's like, the Trudeau show is on. I'm like, oh, okay. Maybe they're going to mention Canadians with disabilities today. Nope. Mention this. And finally, they mentioned about the Canada Disability Benefit. Wow. And I thought, okay, well, why didn't they launch it at the same time as CERB? And I kept thinking back then, how come? And I thought, wow, they got CERB out in a hurry. And now the recent news just came out. I was reading an article about it saying, I was on the news too. They're saying that 65% of recipients who got CERB weren't supposed to get it. That's outrageous. And I thought, wow, meanwhile, Canadians with disabilities are still waiting for something that was promised over 2 years ago, almost 3.
Yeah. One of my big problems with the whole Canada Disability Benefit, I mean, it's a good idea, but one of my big problems with it is because we have such a fractured provincial system all across the country. Like all the provinces have their own way of administrating the social assistance programs, right? And it's just kind of a whole smorgasbord of everybody kind of doing their own thing. So when it comes to the Canada Disability Benefit, one of my big concerns is, like, that the provincial governments are all going to have to come to the table with the federal government, and they're all going to have to kind of coalesce. And I just don't for the life of me, I don't see how the provincial governments are going to play nice or play ball with the federal government without really kicking up a fuss and saying, well, no, we don't want to give up our provincial jurisdiction of doing the benefits ourselves or doing the social assistance systems ourselves. And they're going to start balking at it and not playing nicely. And I just don't see how it's going to do this. Like, that's one of the problems I see with it.
Okay.
Well, go ahead, Peter.
So let me respond on that. First off, we went through this with healthcare, universal healthcare, right? There was some resistance from some provinces initially, but the fact that people were benefiting from it and the federal government was stepping in and making sure that it was being funded meant that all those provinces came on board. And the reality is, I mean, we've seen, you mentioned, Brent, stepping up for people with disabilities. We've seen successive governments, Liberal and Conservative, stepping up for the wealthy in this country. I mentioned the banks, hundreds of billions of dollars. Same with overseas tax havens. We lose $30 billion a year, according to the Parliamentary Budgetary Officer, in overseas tax havens. The ultra-rich always get their needs or their wants taken care of. And we have tens of billions of dollars going to oil and gas executives. So the reality is we've got the money and the funding to do this. The federal government has to close all these loopholes and where they're throwing money away. And they need to sit down with the provinces and negotiate an agreement. If the federal government is funding it, and we've seen this in other issues, provincial governments are going to be more than happy to raise the level of people with disabilities. So it is something, it takes leadership. It is something that can happen, but the federal government has to stop throwing money away at the rich and has to start funding the needs of people with disabilities and other regular Canadians that are really suffering at this time.
Yeah, they definitely have to have that political will to do it. I mean, you look at these grocery chains, these CEOs. I was just hearing about there was one that got a $1.2 million wage increase. Like, meanwhile, people are suffering across the country. There was a quote saying from Jagmeet had asked the CEO, I mean, how are you doing? Like, I mean, I'm doing fine. Well, people are not doing fine in the country. They're suffering. They're having to go to food banks, and why? Like, they don't always get all the food and everything, all their nutrients that they need there. It's great. I mean, if they can go there, they find an independent one that's going to give them healthy food. But nobody should really have to go to a food bank, right? I mean, it's
exactly.
It was supposed to be there temporarily. I think it was a soup kitchens when it was first after the World War, and then kind of branched out. And I have nothing wrong with people having to use a food bank if they need to, because right now. But I think long term, I think we need to get that social safety net. We need to get a complete revamp so that people can buy what they need when they need it. And I guess that kind of branches into the DERB, the Disability Emergency Relief Benefit. That's an intern amount while they study and figure out how to get the Canada Disability Benefit out. It's going to take quite a while, because right now what I'm hearing is they're not sure which is the formula they're going to go with, like the tax year. Some say, and I don't know, this is what I hear. Some say they're going with the 19,000 threshold. Some are going to be going with the higher threshold. I think they're still trying to figure that out. I'm hoping they don't go with the lesser, because I'm not sure how it's all going to work. It's like a top up to the provincial levels, I think, and if they go with the 19, that top up's not going to be a couple $100 maybe.
Well, at least tie it to inflation too. That's a huge thing.
Oh, absolutely.
Inflation. Yeah.
But the reality is, so what does the NDT achieve, right? With our 25 MPs, Jagmeet Singh negotiated hard. This year, we have a dental benefit that is going out specifically for people with disabilities. I mean, a lot of Canadians with disabilities that haven't been able to go to the dentist for years, and their health suffers overall. There's often pain and suffering. So that dental benefit, which is kicking in the next few months, is going to make a big difference. Secondly, the NDP pushed hard on the issue of housing. And so with last year's budget, the federal government now has the obligation to build 150,000 housing units across the country that are affordable. And affordable isn't $2,000 a month or $2,500 a month for a one-bedroom apartment. Affordable is a third of your income, 30% of your income, as we used to have with social housing and cooperative housing. So we've achieved that. And then thirdly, the grocery rebate. As you pointed out, we had the doubling of the GST credit. Jagmeet Singh fought hard on that. We now have a grocery rebate going out. Most of the people, or half the people that will benefit from that, are people with disabilities. And so these are all things that Jagmeet Singh and the NDP caucus, Benita Zarrillo as our disability critic, have fought for. Now, when it comes to the actual issue of the disability emergency benefit or the Canada disability benefit or a guaranteed livable basic income, that the Liberals are nowhere on this. And I expect that is, I mean, we had Benita Zarrillo. She got unanimously passage of the Canada Disability Act on February 2nd. Since then, 2 months, there's been complete radio silence. The budget didn't allocate money to people with disabilities. What that tells me is the Liberals are going to do what they've always done, which is hold out, promise it. You know, you re-elect us, and we'll do something about this. They did the same thing on pharmacare and dental care and child care for decades. And that's why I'm saying people with disabilities need to get out and vote next time, and vote to change the government, and don't vote Conservative. That'll wreck whatever programs are there. You vote NDP, you elect far more NDP MPs, and then we finally can have that critical mass in the House of Commons to put in place a disability benefit, a guaranteed livable basic income for people with disabilities, so that we're not forcing people to go to food banks anymore. And my spouse and I grow food for the local food banks in New Westminster, Burnaby. Yeah. And we've seen how the lineups have massively increased. We see the struggle for housing. We're helping a lot of our constituents with this, but what we really need is change at the top, because that's going to guarantee that people with disabilities across this country have the wherewithal to put food on the table and keep a roof over their head, and have the respect that comes with having that guaranteed livable basic income.
We have a comment or a question from the chat here.
Okay.
From Canuck Peso, and he says, could Peter speak to the Conservative notion that if they do a UBI, it's socialism? They also do not support the CDB, as far as I have heard in question period.
I completely agree. I mean, Conservatives are a disaster. Generally, Conservative administrations are a disaster for people with disabilities, because what the Conservatives are all about is helping people at the top. Liberals at least pay lip service, and we can force them on certain issues, like I've mentioned, the housing, dental care, the grocery rebate. Conservatives just believe that somehow if we give massive amounts to banks and oil and gas CEOs and the very wealthy, that somehow that will trickle down to people with disabilities. And that is a massive failure. That's simply not going to happen. It's a myth. It's propaganda. This idea that it'll trickle down with people with disabilities is simply false. What the NDP believes is actually building an economy from the bottom up. And the lowest in terms of income in this country are people with disabilities. So if you reinforce income for people with disabilities, not only does that help the people with disability and their family, it helps the whole community, because a Canadian with a disability is going to spend the money in the community. They're not jetting off like the ultra rich to a tax haven in the Bahamas and taking all their money with them. They're spending locally. It helps small businesses. It helps to build the local economy.
Well, you put money back into the local economy, and it's going to help blossom all these small businesses rather than big corporations who say, well, we're keeping our prices at a level. Well, they want it that way because they're going to be making all that massive profit. But if you put your money into local businesses, now you're going to help them rather than the big corporations like Walmart's and Superstore and like Save On Foods. I mean, I look at Save On Foods. I don't do my shopping there. I really try not to do my shopping there because I find you don't save too much, right? I find the price is actually quite high. They're
Well,
really
one of the things that bugs me is, just here in BC, I'll just give our own case here, Brent, is, when the provincial governments say that they can't raise the rates, because I think they have this notion that if they raise the rates for people with disabilities, it's somehow flushing the money away, and they're not going to see the money again. It's just like they're just going to throw the money and they're not going to see it. Well, that's kind of a misguided notion, because the idea that you're just flushing money when you're actually, if you give people money, they're going to go spend it. So it's not money that just disappears into the ether and never to be seen again. It's money that's getting circulated and circulated and circulated, and it's going to improve lives. It's not money that just disappears into the ether, like you said, in like investment funds and bonds and stocks, and it's going to get circulated back into the local economies, right?
Well, there was a town.
Can I respond on that? Because that's an important point that Neil makes. I mean, David Eby, the new BC Premier, has announced a massive affordable housing program, $4 billion in 3 years. BC will be building more in affordable housing over the course of the next 3 years, as they have in the previous 4 years, than the rest of the country combined. But the provincial government is also being beset by the federal government's cutbacks on healthcare. We've seen an erosion of healthcare funding. So the BC provincial government is trying to do as much as it can with less money as the federal government fritters its money away in overseas tax havens. So it starts at the top. The federal government has to start closing all these loopholes, obliging the ultra-rich to pay taxes. What a concept. Everybody else pays taxes. How about the ultra-rich and the billionaires? How about they actually pay their fair share of taxes? And in that way, the provincial governments will also be able to step up more. But with the idea of a guaranteed livable basic income that comes largely from the federal government, there's no doubt somebody like David Eby, who understands the situation for people with disabilities, will step up to ensure that there's an agreement to lift people with disabilities out of the dire poverty in which so many of them are found.
Yeah, there was a town hall meeting I attended just about 3 days ago, and they asked people's lived experience, what they would like to see about lifting people out of poverty, and I had brought up a very pressing, very good question, something that I think would benefit so many people, and not just in BC, but I'm hoping that it'd be across the country, by anybody who's on provincial benefits. At one time, it used to be a pension, but they changed that. Neil will probably get into about that one. But anyway, what I had recommended is that anyone who's in market housing, right now they pay what the market rent will bear. So which obviously erodes away off their benefits check. Of course, if they don't have a fixed address, they don't even get that shelter portion. So my recommendation is that anyone who's actually in, say, in social housing or BC housing, and I think on Ontario they call it RGI. There's so many different, housing providers under the one umbrella, right? So what I had recommended was anyone who's in, say, in BC here, who gets the SAFERS program, which is the seniors supplement, or RAP, which is the residential assistance program. So those are the single mothers, single fathers who need that basic supplement for their income for rent. So those two, if they could expand that into PWD who are in market housing, I think it would make a huge difference. Because right now it's just only for BC housing. If they could extend that over to people in market, it would be so much better. That way people are only paying 30% of their income to their corporate landlords, the REITs. Of course, REITs will say, well, yeah, but how do we get paid? Well, it could easily be solved. And I was actually asking my manager here, I've got a very good rapport with her. I asked her, how would that work here? She said, that would be phenomenal, Brent. I would have no problem with that, at all. We still get paid. You still pay your rent. It would just be a certain subsidy check that you get, and then you give your check and then you give it to us, right? And then done. And that way you only pay 30% of your income. The money goes back into the local economy rather than in our pockets. I mean, I'd be more than happy to rent you another unit in the building here for, outrageous amount. I said, okay, and how would that work? You would still only pay 30% of your income. So you could be able to move to another place that's more suitable based on transportation needs, accessibility. And I guess getting to that topic, it's very unfortunate the federal government didn't give the province the transportation amounts that they asked for too, for infrastructure. Very disappointing. I know David Eby is very upset about that because they needed that money. Definitely.
Yeah, but I mean, I think the idea of subsidizing for-profit or financialized housing is something that can be done, but we can't get away from the fact that for the last 40 years, since the Paul Martin Liberal government ended the National Housing Program, we now have a shortage of about half a million affordable housing units. We used to build cooperative housing. What I like about cooperative housing is that those rent checks go exactly to maintaining the actual cooperative housing unit. And as a result of that, it stays in the community. Social housing, the same thing. It goes to a nonprofit, and that's recycled to ensure that there's more housing being built. So we have to make up that 500,000 shortfall in housing that's affordable. And it can't be for-profit housing. We can't afford the 15 to 20% profit on top of it. We have to stay focused on nonprofit and cooperative housing, really, to address the housing crisis. Now, as I mentioned, we forced the Liberals to invest for 150,000 units. There's still easily another 350, 400,000 to go. And we're going to have to keep pressing them on that because until we have housing for everybody, we can't say we have housing as a right in this country. And housing is a right. There shouldn't be the thousands of people we're seeing sleeping out in park benches and on main streets in this country.
Right. It was over 1 million people that came into Canada last year, and they're projecting about another 1.5 million over the next 3 years. So we definitely need to get housing built. The Liberals have to put their foot onto the gas pedal and get these things going rather than debating, well, leave up to the provinces. No, there's transfer the money over. Let's get this going. Like this, there's no need to.
I think one of the things that doesn't get a lot of airplay too is that because we have housing is so astronomical now. I mean, you have human right. Yeah, but you have even like a lot of blue collar workers, let's say, like restaurant workers and janitors and stuff that say in the downtown core where the housing is the highest. I mean, you have a real exodus of those blue collar workers. So, or if you need the blue collar workers, they're coming in from Abbotsford because that's the only place they can afford to live. So it's just crazy. I mean, there used to be, if you work downtown, you could afford to live downtown, and you can't do that anymore. It's just crazy.
Yeah, exactly. And they're just getting pushed further and further east or getting spread out to other communities. You're looking at the first responders. They can't even live in the community that they're living in. They have to commute over from the island over back and forth on the ferry. And that's, definitely, that's not right. And I mean, how a human right, and nobody should have to say, well, I can't afford to have housing. And putting food on the table or paying for medications, and sadly there's so many people that are in that boat where they're having to rotate things and just to try to one little hiccup and boom, they're homeless. And then look at what's happening in I don't want to pick on Vancouver because it's been on the headlines a lot lately, but what's happening in Vancouver, in Nanaimo, Victoria is really bad downtown too. I had to go down there yesterday, and it's so sad, Peter. I mean, I've saw a couple people that are just like, please, like even 25 cents, could you? And I'm sorry, like if I did have 25 cents, I would give that to you. And like, they're just desperate for help. And they says, I just want a place I could call home. and I don't have enough money. And I mean, so many stories that you hear from people just from day to day. And I know we can get this right as a country. We can do it. It is definitely something that has to be fixed.
Yeah, now, I shouted out at the beginning of the program to deaf and hard of hearing people across Canada. I worked very extensively when I led the Western Institute for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing that provided disability supports across British Columbia. One of the things that we did in conjunction with a wide variety of other organizations for people with disabilities, the BC Paraplegic Association, Coast Mental Health, the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, and a variety of others. We came together and we got the major employment contract for people with disabilities. Now, we were able to send that across the country, across the province. It was a landmark program that was later, when I left and went to Parliament, BC Liberal government, as they did so often, basically scorched that program. But it was a terrific way of providing the initial steps for people with disabilities to actually get employment, and everything from providing sign language interpreters for the job interview to ensuring there was funding. If there's one step to get into the business, we would pay for that step so that the business could hire the person with disability. It was win-win because those small businesses found that people with disabilities not only did a fantastic job, but they stayed longer. There isn't the turnover that you see with a lot of new employees, and so it really was win-win. You point out that the issue of small businesses and having people living nearby is essential, and this has an impact on employment for people with disabilities and on the small businesses themselves. If a person with a disability has to live out in Abbotsford or can't get housing at all, they're not going to be available to help those small businesses. And so this is an issue of fairness. It's an issue of building a better local economy. It's an issue of human rights. All of these issues are together. And for far too long in this country, we've put the priorities of banks and billionaires and CEOs above what is really where the essential investment should be if we really want to build a vibrant economy and have a country where everybody matters, where nobody's left behind. And this is what the NDP is pushing for with our 25 voices in the House of Commons. And we are hoping that will be a far bigger number in the next election. But I come back to the point, people with disabilities can determine who the next government is. If 20% of the population gets out and says, we're going to vote this way, that's going to be the future of how the country is governed. And people with disabilities need to use their power to make sure that we have a government that actually respects Canadians with disabilities from coast to coast to coast.
If they only allowed us, if they only allowed you and me, Brent, to have 100% of the vote, we'd have no problems, right?
Yeah, I call it people. I call it, yeah, exactly. I call it people power, right? And it's not. It's they're people with disabilities, their families, it's their caregivers, it's their parents, their grandparents. They all vote, so they all get them to all keep voting. Vote for a better change and bringing in a better government that's actually going to be looking out for people's best interests. Yeah, there we go, Peter. I mean, that vote, it really makes a huge difference because we know what happens. In Ontario, for instance, people say, well, or any other province, like if it was BC or Ontario or any province that say, well, that's the government we got in. Oh, how come? Well, if you don't vote, or if it's a city council, like on a city council level, like, well, how did that person get reelected back in again or whatever? So people, they want to have positive change. They need to come together and.
I always say, if you don't vote, you have no right to complain either.
Yeah. That's exactly it. I had that happen. My mom used to tell me that. I said, get out there and vote. So I pulled her to the voting station and she voted, and she was okay. And it, it really, it made a change, right? I mean, the whole neighborhood did it at one time, and I want to quickly dive in, Peter. I know that wasn't one of our topics, but I just wanted your view about the transportation network throughout BC and across the country. As we know that Greyhound pulled away years ago, But of course, obviously, there's still that ripple effect that we're feeling across the disconnect across the western BC, western provinces versus and also into Ontario and obviously the Maritimes. But that national network got pulled away, and now we got some kind of patchwork that's kind of working, but it can only go so far. And where do you see? Maybe you could carry my comments over to Jagmeet and your other colleagues that could put some pressure on Trudeau and the Conservatives and the Bloc and everybody else that votes on these very important transportation needs to get a other kind of an interprovincial transportation network going, because I know obviously Greyhound, they made some mistakes. And I think a lot of people know that is their structuring. They wanted to restructure. They were pleading for help. Unfortunately, there was deaf ears, that were up there in Parliament from the Liberals and Conservatives that didn't want to hear it. They didn't want to help them out. And I know that they pleaded because I talked to one of the bus drivers. He drives the e-bus now from Vancouver to Kamloops. And he was one of the drivers. And he said, we pleaded for help, but the feds didn't want to hear it. They said, sorry for your bad luck. I mean, you didn't structure things accordingly. And he's a really funny guy, but I said I would carry my voice forward when I have a chance, and I just wanted to throw that out there. Obviously, Greyhound couldn't. I think they made a mistake by going from province to province to province. But if they make a connection between each province and a connecting bus, so BC to Alberta, and then Alberta would go to Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan then get a bus would go to Winnipeg or Manitoba.
Yeah. So two things. First off, I introduced the Canadians with Disabilities Act, which is designed to broaden accessibility in our transportation sector, notably as the Americans with Disabilities Act did in the United States. I mean, if you travel in the United States, the Americans with Disabilities Act, hotels, accommodation are supposed to provide the disabled access rooms. You can see in the transportation sector the difference. So the NDP has introduced that. It was a very ambitious piece of legislation. Still a ton of work that's needed on it. And in fact, the drafters in the House of Commons said, look, for a private member's bill, we don't have the capacity. You can only bring this kind of a bill forward when you form government. So one of the things that needs to happen is transportation accessibility, but that can only happen if we have a transportation network. And the NDP's always believed that you need to have a combination. I mean, as Social Democrats, we don't believe that the market governs all. That's why Tommy Douglas and the NDP fought for universal health care, because there are some areas where it doesn't make sense to build in profit. Another example is housing. Affordable housing means you can't just financialize all housing. You need to build cooperative, you need to build social housing, right? That is often publicly owned. Same with our transportation sector. The reality is the private sector is not going to have huge profits for ensuring that we have transportation across the country. They will cream certain routes, but they will leave most of the infrastructure abandoned. And that's why having Via Rail works, except the government's underfunding it. And that's why having a transportation sector, a bus network, makes sense as well. That's publicly owned, that isn't driving for a 15% profit, but is actually keeping as its focus, ensuring that we have an infrastructure across the country so that people don't have to hitchhike, as we saw in the Highway of Tears, what that meant for people not having transportation in northern British Columbia. It has led to the deaths and disappearances of many Indigenous women. There is a vulnerability that comes for not having a transportation sector in place. So the NDP believes we need to rebuild the transportation sector and make it accessible. And we can do that in a way to public ownership that ensures that Canadians have a good quality of life. Because the reality is, as you know, Brent, as you know, Neil, if somebody has a disability and they're living in northern Saskatchewan with no transportation network, they could be cut off. If they live in northern Alberta with Greyhound withdrawing, they're cut off. These are things that are essential for our quality of life, particularly in a country as vast as Canada. So the transportation sector is something we take very seriously, both the accessibility, but also having a transportation network so that people aren't left, particularly low-income people, vulnerable with no recourse in terms of how they can get from point A to point B to visit their family or to visit close friends. That's part of the quality of life that we should all enjoy in Canada. But to pay for it, we need to shut down the overseas tax havens and the hemorrhaging of tens of billions of dollars every year there. We have to be responsible with the resources we have. Giving to banks and giving to billionaires isn't and shouldn't be the priority. It should be funding services and making sure people with disabilities have a livable income.
Like we have right out in the Fraser Valley right now, like they have a transit labor dispute, a US company that's not cooperating, and they're supposed to be providing the service, and that's just they can't get it figured out. Well, they're going to lose the contract, right? Because it's like if you of course, who knows if they pay taxes? I don't know. I mean, it's just sad because it's leaving the whole community in hostage situation almost. I mean, maybe not the word hostage, but they're leaving them. They're basically keeping them from moving around their communities. I mean, for me, I'd love to go out to the valley. I can't get out there because there's no bus, and you can't walk along Highway 1. I mean, no, definitely. Yeah. But I mean, what you do, take an e-bus out there, it costs yourself, who knows, like $70-$80 to go to Chilliwack. I mean, yeah, so it's again, it's having a reliable transportation. If one company can't get it figured out, well, then we'll have to pass the torch on to somebody else who can, keep things interlined. Yeah, you made a really good point on that, Peter. I mean, it's people with disabilities, being in rural communities. I think it's so important to having that network of transportation. Otherwise, they're cut off. And I think there's so much opportunity. Like, I know in northern BC, they have they call it North Bus, which is great. They have that contract with the provider, which is servicing the communities up that way. And I know Lee Gazan, she talks a lot about the Indigenous communities and being kind of cut off from different resources. I think she's totally awesome too. And Benita, and there's a lot of them. I'll go through the whole list, but yeah, I
was just going to interject there, Brent. We're right at the top of the hour, like we're pushing right at the top of the hour there. So if there's any closing comments from Peter or yourself, we can kind of start to wrap
up. I'll start with Peter first.
Well, I want to thank you for the program that you put on, the information you get out there. We're trying very hard to get information out as well. And we're going to keep fighting for people with disabilities. We've achieved some things like dental care and the start on affordable housing, and also the grocery rebates and the emergency benefit. These are things that the NDP fought for. We've got a lot more to fight for. Jagmeet Singh would be the first to admit that, Benita Zarrillo as well. But we want to get to a country where nobody's left behind. People with disabilities can help us in that fight if you get out and vote in the next campaign and make sure that the House of Commons changes markedly. Never underestimate the power of the vote. And so thanks for having me on the program, and look forward to appearing again soon.
Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. It's been a great pleasure, Peter, having you join us, and always a great pleasure having you join us on the show, as always. And you're right. People just need to see change. You need to vote for the NDP. And next time around, when you get the ballot, check off who your representative is in your community. If you're in Peter's community, check the mark. Thank you, and thank you very much, Peter. And for me, the closing comments is I want to thank you very much, Peter, for taking the time today to come on to my show. It's always a great pleasure having you and a lot of your colleagues who come in and join me and talking about these pressing issues that really affect Canadians with disabilities. And the allies. I mean, you're an ally, and there's so many allies that it affects their lives too. A disability can be invisible, it can be physical, it can be so many different types of disabilities, and having people coming in and carrying our voices and hearing our voices, because that's what, and it makes a change. It's bringing everybody together as the community, and it's great pleasure having you on, Peter. So I know we can make changes happen, and get people power, right? And that's how it works, is bringing us all together, making change for the better.
Yeah, that's good.
And Neil, what would you any comments for
Yeah,
yourself?
just thank you, Peter, for coming on, and we're so excited to be able to relaunch on a more secure channel where you're not getting harassed, which is nice for me as a producer.
Yes, yes,
that's a big thumbs up for me. So
yes.
again,
Most
we're really happy that you came back, and yeah, so that's great.
I look forward to having you back on again soon, Peter. We'll do a follow up, and I do every so often. Thanks again, Peter, and everybody for tuning in.
Hi, everyone.
And we'll see you again soon.